Freedom, also published as an autobiography, 1936, was written by Jawaharlal Nehru, while imprisoned between June 1934 and February 1935. It spans roughly 672 pages and is arranged in 68 chapters, offering deeply personal narratives, intertwined with the emergence of India's nationalist movement. The title signals both personal odyssey, okay, and collective journey, towards Indian independence, reflecting Nehru's dual identity, as intimate, autobiographer and national leader, right? So early life and education here, born in November 14, 1889, in Allahabad, in a prosperous Kashmir, Brahmin household. His father Motilal Nehru was noted noted barrister and Congress leader. So educated at Harrow and obviously Cambridge, where he absorbed liberal ideals, but also felt the contradictions of colonial privilege, sparking an internal conflicts between Western thought and anti-colonial consciousness. Returned to India in 1912, and initially practiced law, but remained largely detached from nationalist politics until Gandhi's mass mobilization reshaped his direction. Awakening to India's reality here. Significant transformation began with Nehru's exposure to rural and agrarian crisis, right? He recounts accompanying Kisan's peasants in 1920 on 50-mile march to Allahabad. So here this deeply humbling experience awakened him to the scale of deprivation and political disconnection. He saw how urban activists and media remained blind to rural suffering, cut off from our people. We lived in a little world apart. This shift, intensified his commitment, from bourgeois politics towards broader political, there is a popular nationalist movement. So entry into politics and Congress leadership. So here Nehru's active involvement in the Indian National Congress began in 1919 to 1920. He became a key figure in debates between moderates and extremists, right? So ultimately here aligning with Gandhi's mass-based civil disobedience and non-cooperation approaches. He describes Gandhi's entry as revolutionary, transforming the struggle from elite politics to nationwide revolt. The wave of non-cooperative after 1920 allowed the masses to step forward, leading the arrests here, that including his own in December 1921 alongside his father. Non-cooperation here, though non-violent, was abruptly ended by Gandhi in February 1922, following the Chori Choda incident, an emotional blow, but making the rise of mass nationalism. So ideological evolution and socialist vision here, Nehru increasingly embraced socialism and planning. He admired Soviet industrial progress and hoped to blend democratic ideals with economic transformation for India. So his vision includes secularism's democratic scientific tempo and rationalism, right? So here traits he contracted sharply with dogma and superstition, right? So he criticizes organized religion as often fostering exploitation and bigotry rather than spirituality, advocating a secular state wherein diverse beliefs, right, so coexist without conflict, right? So major movements and milestones towards independence. So Swadeshi and Khadi movement, right? Swadeshi and Khadi movements inspired by local self-reliance and rejection of imported goods, right? So embraced as moral backbone of freedom struggle. So Purna Swaraj declaration here 1930, as Congress president Nehru proclaimed complete independence, hosting the tricolor at Lahore on January 26 and initiating mass civil disobedience, including the salt satyagraha, right? Nehru narrates how these events crystallized India's demand for complete sovereignty, right, for beyond reforms and domination status. Reflection on imprisonment and personal life. The autobiography is framed by Nehru's jail term, Over 9 years in various prisons, fueled deep reflection, political strategy, and philosophical growth. He reflects, tenderly on the loss of his wife, Kamala Nehru, and his evolving relationships with his daughter Indira, right, whom he raised largely under challenging circumstances. Intellectual and emotional intimacy with peers, right, Gandhi, Tagore, other Congress, stalwarts, right, is captured with nose balancing, reverence and critic. So critic of British rule and vision for Swaraj. Nehru condemns, colonial administration, not just as politically oppressive, but also as inefficient and dehumanizing. He argues that self-governance must deliver real improvement for the masses, not simply national prestige. Right. So here he framed independence as moral and governmental removal of fear, expansion of democratic institutions, economic uplift, education, health and social justice. So here legacy and global influence, that although the autobiography ends before 1947, Nehru's ideas foreshadowed his later role as India's first prime minister and architect of many modern institutions, IITs, aims, ISRO, public sector democratic elections, neutrality in global affairs that we call non-aligned movement. His advocacy for secular pluralism, guided Indian constitutional values. He laid the foundation of India's federal democratic public, emphasizing religious equality and minority rights. He led India in the non-aligned movements, promoting sovereignty and neutrality in a bipolar Cold War world, right? So rooted in principles of peaceful coexistence and anti-imperialism, right? So here next point is what, critical perseverance, critical perspectives. I'm just saying, not perseverance, it's critical perspectives. Some critics, especially representatives of business and conservative factions, found Nehru's socialism, objectionable, in 1930s. Industrialists like Birla and Kowalski, feared his rhetoric would harm Indian, capitalism. Later critics, contrasts here Nehru's, consensual leadership and pluralism, with more authoritarian and Hindu nationalist trends under subsequent administrations, right? So here next point is what, structure and style of book. Here Towards Freedom, uses chronological and reflective style, personal and anecdotes blend the political commentary, social observation, philosophical meditation. Nehru voice is both humble and authoritative, self-critical, transparent and deeply idealistic. He doesn't gloss over failures, such as abrupt and of non-cooperation or miscalculation of communal politics, but sees them as learning points towards more inclusive politics. So here the conclusion of the point is what, that Towards Freedom is both history, prophecy, Towards Freedom is both history and prophecy, documenting a critical era and projecting here Nehru's hopes for India's future. It captures turbulent 50 years span, colonial operations, mass activism, ideological ferment and emergence of a nation. So the book remains essential for understanding Nehru's moral and political universe, his idealisms, flaws and strategies and legacy here, as literary work here. It resonates, with sincerity, written in confinement but reaching beyond personal walls, into India's larger destiny. Right. So this is all about the story of Towards Freedom of Jawaharlal Nehru, right? So yeah.